It's my pleasure to invite Gautama, the Director Secretary of the Palar Center for Learning of Krishnamurti Foundation, India.
And at Bhumi, very fondly known as a friend, philosopher, guide, as somebody who's been inspiring Bhumi since its inception of Prakriya. Let's bring our hands together for Gautama.
I'd like to begin with a small Sufi story, one of my favorites of all time. There were once three young men who went to meet a Sufi master, and they wanted the higher learning from him. And they approached him and said, "Will you please teach us?" And he took them into the garden and said, "Please observe my actions." And took a stick, and he found there were flowers, plants which were smaller, which were bigger, there were flowers. With his stick, he kept hitting plants and walked for a little while and came back. He said, "Please interpret my actions." And one young man said, "When you come to the teachings, you undergo a leveling." Another person said, "Things which appear important may not be so important." And the third one said, "With a dead stick, you can injure some things which are living." And he said, "All of you are right. None of you have the perfect answer. Putting together what you have said still doesn't make the complete picture." And I think this is the open window that probably we all struggle to keep alive in our lives, because we don't know. We know some things, we know a lot. We know, we have lived our lives, we understand certain things, we know how to keep our body and soul together, we know how to find fault with people. But do we have space for the view which we have never heard till now? Do we have open space in our minds and our hearts? And today I'd like to argue by saying that in an increasingly digital world, that the time has come when analog is far more important, where the nuances are very important, where the right versus wrong is not the only answer. In fact, it's rarely the answer. And I'd like to also start by saying education, an educator is not a service provider. An educator is an inviter of possibilities, possibilities which the educator himself doesn't know or does not understand fully. I think in the 21st century India being a signatory to GATT, education has been cornered into the economic zone of being a service. Goods and services are being taxed. Surely services will be taxed. But I think it may be interesting to go back a little bit and look at what education was. I'd also like to say, again, maybe speak slightly anecdotally, maybe there may be some humor in it, and maybe there will be some things which you just don't agree with, but please have some space for that. In the year 2005, I've had the privilege of working in a Krishnamurti school for the last 30 years. And there's a lot of space for questioning, for thinking, and for attempting some things which haven't been tried before. So one of the attempts that I had the opportunity of being part of was to move school from the same age experience to the multi-age experience. And when I was thinking about this in the middle school and we were working on it, and the processes of understanding knowledge, the processes of understanding the given, the content, one day it suddenly struck me that the content didn't seem particularly relevant. The manner in which one approached content was far more important. Whether one understood what was actually being said by the person, or what was written, or what one views, whether one really had some questions to ask, whether one had the patience to go into these questions and discover one's own answers. So in a world which is very, very content heavy, The internet has seen to it today that you can have access to any content. I'd like to also argue that content is far less relevant than the processes of digestion, the processes of thinking, the processes of consideration, far less relevant. Any view can be expressed, but do we have the capacity to digest it, to understand it? And this doesn't seem to be part of our educational praxis at the moment at all. I think greening of content is fine, but I think flowering of the hearts that feel full, not empty, is far more important. You know, what makes us clutch at content and improvement is often the fact that we feel impoverished inside. We don't feel we are worthy. We don't feel that we have enough. So there was a remarkable historian called Braudel, Fernand Braudel, who is known as the prince among historians. He says, men don't make history, but it's history that makes men and thereby absolves them of the blame. So it's possible to say that we are products of history and so victims of our circumstances. But I think that's the other way of looking at history also, and probably I'll touch upon some things that I have learned, maybe as an example for you to consider. We moved from monarchy and colonialism towards democracy, and we thought that the world was getting to be an improved place, that we would all have voices. But we have arrived at a time when 1% of the population holds 60% of the global wealth. 10% people in India hold 80% of the wealth and 1% hold 60%. 3 of the richest people in US own 50% of the wealth of the bottom 50%. So, from monarchy to democracy, we seem to have arrived very nicely at distributed monarchies. They don't have to hold land, they don't have to conquer. But we have a monarchy in place. And we have power being wielded in multiple ways. And yes, we have the notion of democracy. And of course, along with that goes many things, including regime change. So, as somebody used the word of extraction, I think the distributed monarchy is extracting wealth, sucking it up from people who don't have. That's the way to go. Go about it. Trade, globalization, corporations are agents of this change. In a very interesting book called In the Absence of the Sacred, Jerry Mander makes a rather provocative statement. He says, we always treat in the name of justice that a human being should be considered innocent unless proven guilty. And he said, whenever groups of individuals get together, they should be treated guilty unless proven innocent. Because groups seem to have the capacity to do some things which are very difficult, which are very problematical, because they don't have enough reflective energy sometimes. And there's not enough questioning and not enough dissent within the group. So sometimes things which are unpardonable can happen because groups take over power. And corporations are one of the classic examples of this. For instance, if we say drugs are illegal and bad for human society and human well-being, then why would we get our children addicted to all kinds of gadgets or all kinds of technology? Why would we consider, why is it being pushed with such increasing vehemence in society? If it is really bad, if addiction and drugs are bad, why is addiction being pushed into society under the guise of learning, under the guise of being good education, under the guise of it being the right way to live your life in the 21st century? There is also in the technological world today what I would call the tyranny of the visual. The visual has come of age today. You can't buy a phone without a camera built into it. And I don't know, we are all generating images by the millions and billions. The image of something seems to be a complex thing. It speaks to our unconscious. And the whole adventure of marketing and selling seems to somehow bypass any capacity we have to actually see things and get beyond it. To touch us in zones which are beyond our ability to kind of manipulate and understand. And the visual is a very strong element of this, I'd like to argue. So, should telling stories be accompanied by visuals? It has come of age, I know, but maybe not. Maybe the voice, maybe the expression of the human face, like people have done for centuries or thousands of years. Maybe there's a greater value to that. Maybe the immediacy to that is far better. The polished visual, the highly, glossy way of presenting letters, of having images fading in and fading out. Yes, they have tremendous capacity. But is that really necessary for human communication? Does it really edify the person who's listening? Or does it make him or her more distant from the thing that is being shown, and therefore diminish the person somewhat, diminish the person substantially if you have a large dose of this? The incapacity of the human being today, I think, is largely fed through the kind of imagery which surrounds us all over and makes that image far more important than the living sharing that's possible between human beings. Now, I'm going to speak a little bit about history. The history is written by conquerors. We all know that. And the history of conquerors, while maybe interesting and everything, I think one would always have a question: what was the life of common people like? What did they do? What did the farmer do? What did children do? What did women do? What happened to people when they made mistakes? How were they punished? These questions would always exist, and I'm sure many of us would have asked these even in our schools if we had the space, and maybe we would have discounted it as the history of kings and queens. But there are examples of the conquerors' histories which suddenly you find glimpses of enormous praise, appreciation for what existed among the people whom they conquered. And I had the great privilege of meeting and sharing the work of a man called Dharampal. Some of you may know, he's a remarkable historian. And all his work he did by sitting in England, by looking at the records of India House and in the museums, and fished out evidence from there about what was India like in the 1800s, what happened in the late 1700s. And British, being meticulous documenters, had many records. So from their records, he says, according to the hard data in terms of content and proportion of those attending institutional school education, the situation in India in 1800 is certainly not inferior to that obtained in England. And in many respects, Indian schooling seems to have been more extensive, and it should be remembered that it's a greatly damaged and disorganized India that one is referring to. India was already damaged in 1800. The content of studies was better than what was studied in England. The duration of study was more prolonged. It is, however, the Madras Presidency and the Bengal-Bihar data which presents a kind of revelation. The data reveals the background of the teachers and the taught. It presents a picture which is in sharp contrast to the various scholarly pronouncements of the past 100 years or more, in which it has been assumed that education of any sort in India till very recent decades was mostly limited to the twice born among the Hindus and among the Muslims to those from the ruling elite. The actual situation which is revealed was different. It was quite contrary for at least among the Hindus in the districts of Madras Presidency and dramatically so in the Tamil-speaking areas, as well as the two districts of Bihar. It was the group named Shudras and the caste considered below them who predominated in the thousands of the then still existing schools in practically each of these areas. Our education system today, we say India has, even through traditional economics, only 2% of the GDP. Shashi Tharoor's work and his kind of bringing up data says we had 27% of GDP before the British came. So what happened in between, we don't know. But something has happened, obviously. And we are still scrambling around to pick up the pieces. And there's a move today, you see, in national education to somehow legitimize the multiple languages in this country. I'm very happy that the new education policy says that everybody should know at least a few sentences in multiple languages in this country. Thank God, at least they are saying that. I'm also very happy that the new education policy says that the content should be reduced in the 11 and 12 and should not be so heavy, so students will feel like studying science and feel like traveling, feel like having some space to study. But nevertheless, we are not addressing the core issues. If there were 100,000 schools in the Bengal presidency at that time, and they were marvelous schools, 100,000 schools, what did they have? Were they age-wise segregated schools? Did they teach subjects? How did they manage 27% of the world's GDP? So what kind of education? I think we are not learning our lessons adequately from this experience. I think we are tapping very much to the surface. Claude mentioned about the richness and the diversity of this nation. Small schools under one teacher, maybe sometimes two students studying by themselves. And I was talking about Dharampal's work, and this is where in Gandhi Ashram in Wardha, I actually met Dharampal and had a lovely conversation with him. And he talked about these schools to me, and I said that if something like that was happening, maybe we don't know how to run schools which are not age-wise segregated, but maybe let's find out. And that was in the year 2005, 2006, when we wrote a proposal and our school went in that direction. And it was a revelation to us to discover that students could be very active participants. In fact, the teacher had to fade away to the fringes, and something very dramatic and different could happen in the classroom. And in fact, that's where I understood that content is not that significant. If people know what does it mean when you're given a piece of knowledge, what can you do with it? How can you understand it? How can you play with it? How can you question it? No, without that capacity, it doesn't matter what knowledge you have only indoctrination. You have only advertisement. You have only brainwashing. And we know that we don't want these things. But what else do we have? Where are we building this tenacity, this capacity, this robustness for really going, picking any piece of information, any view that's available to us, and being able to examine it? Where is this being picked? And we are also somehow, with the kind of whole process, we built a certain diffidence to question. Diffidence, if somebody is opposed with something, we feel very bad. There's not enough emotional robustness. Because education has become a process where you learn, you swallow, there is a teacher, the teacher knows better than you do, and having learned, you have to go in the privacy of your room or wherever you study, and there you have to read. So reading has become an isolated activity, quite separate from the social activity of being together. Reading has no value. We don't know how to make it valuable in the social spaces. And yes, reading, there are lots of books. There is a lot of material available. And maybe reading is important. I'm saying maybe because I can't be too conclusive about it. But I think reading does open. Reading allows you the space to read something and read it again a second time and put it aside and stop reading and continue. Unlike the visual imagery of the videos where you are run at the pace is dictated for you. You're not learning at your own pace. You can watch it 100 times, but the pace is not in your hand at all. And I wonder if sometimes we want to give ourselves the freedom of choice or the freedom of pace and the freedom to ponder, to question, to think, to wait, to argue. Do we want to give ourselves that, or do we want to give us a freedom of choice of choosing which thing we want? I also want to speak about an India which I have stumbled upon. Now, I don't know, to many of the younger people here, by garb may communicate that I belong to an older generation and I'm an old-fashioned fellow. But let me tell you that when I studied in the Indian Institute of Technology 50 years ago, I was one of the modern youth. I had all the brash questioning that was needed of that time. I thought all the older people, when they talked about the Indian civilization and the Indian processes, they were all really old hat. I was impatient for the future. And it took me a long time to understand some of the special aspects of this country. And I'm going to put this aside with the new knowledge which I've learned in the early 2000s. You see, India, the floor is extremely valuable. People can sit beside and people can do multiple things with the floor. India, you have unstitched cloth. Unstitched cloth is quite remarkable. You can use it in multiple ways. For the man, for the woman, for the house. Now, many examples of this one can see in India. You have vessels which can be used in multiple ways. Now, I would say this was the genius of this land. That probably through 5,000 years of history, somewhere people discovered that we are all one. There's not that much difference. Just because I happen to be 2 inches bigger around the waist than you, it doesn't mean I need a separate piece of cloth. The same piece of cloth is possible. And if you come home and I give you a dhoti to wear, you can wear it with the same elegance and the same different styles that you wish. Now, somewhere along the line with this whole industrial revolution and with the preponderance of manufacture, some dramatic things have changed. And after the war, first war and later, things changed even more. And I'd invite each one of you to have a look at Adam Curtis' Century of the Self, how they used Freud's discoveries and Freud's insights in a completely pernicious manner. One of the things that happened as a result of this movement, which is described very well in that particular video, which I won't kind of speak about to you now, is that I think human society everywhere was a need-based society. If you needed a pair of shoes, you got it, but you bought the pair of shoes which would last you for years. You didn't buy a pair of shoes because you needed to wear something for the evening party and then discard it and buy another one for the next party. You didn't buy clothes like that. You didn't buy vessels for your home like that. But somehow, they said desire is fine. It's okay to have, it's okay to desire, it's okay to have more things than you need. And we have Imelda Marcos at one end of the spectrum with 3,000 pairs of slippers. Can you imagine? Let me tell you, I think if in our homes we take stock of the number of footwear that we have and the things that we have, clothes that we don't use. Every year people are giving away clothes even in India because they have surplus clothes. How did we get here? And so I was delighted to hear Greta when she says, I don't fly, I'm vegan, and I'm a no shopper. She says, I don't shop. I wear used clothes. I buy my mother's clothes. I'm quite happy with that. I wonder if as part of people who hold a certain care for waste, for the earth, whether we dare to really ask ourselves, how much do we need? And do we not kind of get blown over when somebody says, hey, you're not wearing the most stylish thing. It's all right. It's all right. We are giving, again, the visual far more important, the way a person dresses, the way a person's hair is, rather than the person. And I think part of education is to teach or somehow communicate to human beings that which is measurable, all right, is fine. But there are things beyond the measurable. Like Rumi says, there's a field beyond right and wrong. I'll meet you there. Do we dare travel in that field? Do we dare meet each other beyond the measurable or only with the measurable? Or only with the images that have been burnt into our mind of what is stylish, what is fashionable, what's good looking, what's not good looking? If there was a poor person sitting on the road, not wearing very stylish clothes and wearing, maybe asking for money or maybe doing whatever he or she is doing, would we have eyes to be able to observe that human being at all? And understand that his destiny on this earth is not terribly different from yours and mine. I think this thing of one size fits all, I think is part of the genius. And I think possibly in this metaphor there is a lot of value for us in modern education. I think we are doing, in the name of choice and in the name of being able to measure who has ADHD, who doesn't have something else, I think we're taking away a far more fundamental right of being, the right of being who you are, as you are, and being valued for who you are as you are. And I think this is a very critical thing. I'd like to also suggest that numbers are the metaphor of war. Strength in war is numbers. War is predictable. You can have a win and a lose. And trade and business are other forms of war. Strategies are used in both. Recently, in Pathshala where I work, Pathshala is a small experiment. It's 120 children. We crafted it around the Dunbar's number, which gives greater value to interactions, relationships, rather than numbers in any other way. You can look it up in the dictionary. Facebook uses Dunbar's number, by the way. 150 people you can know well at any point of time, and you can relate to them properly. So I did have this conversation with some of our senior students when they came back from the vacation, saying you have at home, you have privacy. You have privilege. You have access to all the digital tech that you can think of. You have your own little room, some of you. You have your own toilets. Nobody shares it with you. And you have a variety of things that you can do and order different kinds of food from wherever you want. You have everything. You even have an air conditioner maybe. And you don't have to clean your room. You don't have to pick up the towel. Somebody is there to pick and do. Why do you come to a place like Pathshala where you have none of this? So one young lady, 16, 17, said, I don't know why I have good parents, but still I seem to find more space. I find more listening here. Another one said, I find there's a pressure in my home. People are telling me things always. I'm not having the space to figure out things for myself. That second young man was from Bangalore. The third young lady was from Hyderabad and Bangalore, and she said, you are absolutely right. I have all these things at home. You are absolutely right. But with all these things, my sense of entitlement grows, and my life is led trying to protect my entitlement. So my mind is only working on protecting my entitlement. And then she went on to say, in Pathshala we don't have all these things. So you have the same cot as everybody else, you have shared toilets, you have the same food, your clothes don't matter, nobody looking at your clothes. And you sit on the same floor, you don't have any of this special entitlement, you have the same problems. If it rains, you have water on the floor. So then there is space to really think about the real questions of life. I don't know how many of us here, maybe there are 16-year-olds who could have found the wisdom to be able to articulate it like this. I certainly didn't have that capacity. I don't think I have the capacity to articulate this wisdom in this beautiful way. So what does all this have to do with education? Is that education variety? Is it offering people what they like? Is it only if we don't have regimentation, do we have nothing else? What happens to human contact? What happens to the butterfly? What happens to people standing and just talking over things without any pressure? I think education happens incidentally. I think people learning happens incidentally while they are doing things, while they are engaged, while they are learning ways of being. So the large is beautiful for war, for trade, for business, multinational business, not small business. For all other things, small is beautiful. So Gandhi was very right when he talked about the small village as the unit of the nation. And in this country, which already has a history, 200 years before, 300 years before, thousands of years, schools of learning, small, decentralized. The end is unpredictable, but is wholesome. Large will have to work with predictable results. Whereas in this nation, teaching was always an offering. Vidya was always dhanam. You could not predict where it would take the person who picked up whatever you had to say or whatever you had to offer. And I think education is movement from that which can be measured to that which is valuable. And I wonder if we have in the spaces, I think we limit ourselves too much to the given. I wonder if the human spirit can question, disturb the given and create perturbations enough in the spaces that we have. For instance, Pathshala has only dry composting toilets. I mean, there is a little bit of objection to it from some quarters in the beginning. But now, the Tamil Nadu government in their book on eco-sanitation, Pathshala figures rather prominently. Now, today we may think an idea is strange, but maybe in the future, maybe not too far away when water is short, can you imagine flushing your toilet? I mean, in that sense, I've never been to Ladakh. I believe we have a commonality with Ladakh where they have only dry toilets. And we have 10 varieties, and now students are getting involved and trying to create their own models, and something is happening with this. They're also creating other kinds of solutions with regard to waste, with regard to biogas, etc. I think the purpose of education is to leave the younger generation with a sense of hope, and not just with the burdens of all the things that we have not managed to accomplish. So I'll just play you a 1-minute video. One of my young students recited this.
It's crumbling, the earth, and tomorrow it will vanish. Where will you live? Have you ever thought about it? Where will you live? Under the ocean, wrapped in plastic, or cramped in tiny rooms? Where will you live? Maybe on the tip of an iceberg. Nowhere to go. That's where we will be. You and me. It's happening. The world is ending. The truth cannot be more apparent. The earth is dying because humanity is stupid. So utterly stupid that all we care about is ourselves. It's not far away. Climate change. Open your eyes, please. Not for anyone else but yourself. Because you are going to inherit this earth. This earth that gives you life. We have a lifelong debt, and it's certainly not going to be paid by taking more. Enough, it's enough. You cannot live like this anymore. Maybe we can escape to Mars, or maybe Neptune or Uranus, but we won't live there. We will wreck them too, conquering the universe, star by star. Surely you've thought about living on the sun too. It's crumbling, this earth, and I beg of you, please don't just watch it burn.
Do I take questions now?
My question is simple. How do we make these kind of schools more accessible and more scalable in model? I'm sure there are a lot more parents who would want their children to go to such schools, but then accessibility is a question. And would that mean that the parents have to relocate to where schools are? And for example, if I want to put my children in Pathshala or KFI, or the number of seats are so limited, or number of positions are so limited, that we are bound to let them continue in the current schools.
I got your question. Where do we begin? We had 100,000 schools in the Madras Presidency or Bengal Presidency. They were distributed. They were small schools. Do we dare to dream up these schools because we care for our children? At KFI is a very small institution. We have 2,000 children. We can't do more. We have designed small. And that's okay. And that's our role, I think. Our role is to question the given and to try and see if a different kind of education can happen even in our own schools. Often we find very strong criticism of our own work in our schools. So we can't say we have a model which we can tout for the world. But if people are interested in good education for their children, maybe people should get together and create these little schools. And there is room. India has 1.3 billion people. Do we dare is the question. Or are we looking for the old model of schools?
Hi. So you mentioned that the purpose of education for kids is to leave them with hope also, one of it. But like with these current, aggressions from a lot of kids, so like how do we go around that? Like leaving the younger generation with hope. I think what I'm feeling is that there is a movement of little aggression in the younger ones, as we saw yesterday, Greta Thunberg. So how do we find that balance? Do we have to, try to inculcate that hope in the same kids, or there has to be a different movement for kids with hope? Like, is there a conflict there?
Okay, got your question. Who doesn't have aggression inside them? which can be triggered off. So I think, first of all, to kind of box the problems is itself an issue. We are the world. As Krishnamurti said, you are the world and the world is you. We carry everything that everybody else carries. And if we understand that, how do we relate to people off the pedestal? That's another Krishnamurti saying. Can he says to teach us, get off the pedestal. How do we enter conversational spaces with the young? Do we dare? They see us, the older people are different. Older people see them as different. But is it possible to not do this? Not to lock ourselves in our roles? Not to lock ourselves because of our be limited by our age, young or old? Yes, the young are fed on this media business today. Of course, the media is telling them that all the older people. Ralph Nader said this in 1997. He said corporations are telling children that parents don't know how to tell you how to lead your world. We'll tell you how to lead your life. So we have unleashed this on the younger generation. Now, what do we do? Where do we begin? I think the whole conference is about such questions of dismantling what's existing, not through aggression, but maybe through insight, maybe through change of heart, maybe through finding the strength to make some beginnings. We don't know what the collective endeavor, where it will lead us. But if we don't do this, we do nothing. We sit on our hands and lament. And the future generation will ask us. I mean, if they laugh at us, it's enough. But they will sneer at us. They will say, what have you left us? What have you done? You had paradise given to you. Why have you reduced it to ashes? So do we want to enter this conversation at all? Humbly. Because it requires a lot of humility and a lot of not knowing. Thank you. Thank you all.